Much is required. This is the spirit that guides our work.
The Bush Center is warm and welcoming. Built on the campus of SMU, my alma mater, we invite visitors through our doors to attend public programming that attracts newsmakers and thought leaders for important conversations around the issues we care most about.
The Bush Center is a unique asset. Having a presidential center and an institute combined is something that differentiates us from most places around the country. We're able to go where other people cannot go and access resources that other people can't access. When we talk, people listen. And when we invite, they come. And when we take on a project, we finish it.
When you walk into the Bush Institute, you'll see a quote from my presidency on the wall that summarizes the principles we're committed to. It is important that we continue to defend these beliefs.
We do that through our 3 impact centers: domestic excellence, global leadership, and our engagement agenda. Domestic excellence. To be a great country, you should have strong economic growth, great education, take care of your veterans, and develop future leaders. In global leadership, it means promoting global health, advancing freedom and democracy, and empowering women worldwide. And our engagement agenda is how we spread the word about what principled leadership is and the core values we're able to perpetuate.
The Bush Institute is making a profound difference in the world. The reason is pretty simple. We don't just do policy and research, we put it into action. Through the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program, we're training rising leaders across the country. Through the work we do on school leadership, where we work with district officials across the country to recruit, retain high-performing principals in our schools. We're helping post-9/11 veterans and their families find employment through our Vet Roadmap. We've also created the Warrior Wellness Alliance, a network of organizations that represent over 1 million veterans to address the invisible wounds of war and connect more veterans to quality care.
We wanted the Bush Institute to be a place that improved the lives of people at home and around the world. We teach young leaders from emerging democracies the skills they need to help their countries succeed. We equip women from Afghanistan and the Middle East, North Africa region with the knowledge required to become effective leaders. And we continue to ensure that women in Africa who are surviving HIV/AIDS are not dying from cervical cancer.
Following the example set by President and Mrs. Bush, these early results inspire us to do more and to help more people.
We bring people to this great campus and this great facility, but also online through our publications and thought-provoking journals. We're able to carry the messages around principled leadership and what President Bush's example means to all of us.
Having the Bush Center here is really the crown jewel of the campus. Everyone associated with SMU is extremely proud of it.
The value of the George W. Bush Presidential Center to Dallas and North Texas, outside the state of Texas, is truly incalculable.
With SMU, we've hosted conversations with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and with business leaders like Jeff Bezos. Our policy programs benefit from the minds and interests of SMU faculty and students.
My hope is that the Bush Center will always serve as a place where timeless principles are celebrated, protected, and promoted. We just want to make sure the next 10 years are as great as the beginning years of what we're doing here.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mrs. Laura Bush.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all. Good evening. Good evening and welcome to Engage at the Bush Center, presented by Highland Capital Management. I'm thrilled that all of you are here for the first Laura Bush Book Club event. You may not know, but today is my birthday. And as a former librarian, there's no better way to celebrate than by being with all of you to talk about one of my favorite books with one of my favorite authors. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Thanks to the Bush Foundation board members who are here with us tonight, and a heartfelt thanks to our esteemed author, Alexander McCall Smith. Thank you for giving me the best of birthday presents, your beautiful poem, which I think you all may hear shortly, your friendship and your presence tonight. We're thrilled to have you here as we kick off my favorite Engage series, a book club. Alexander McCall Smith, or Sandy, as his friends call him, grew up in Zimbabwe before settling in Scotland in 1984. He spent his early years as a highly respected professor of medical law in the UK before turning his hand to writing fiction in his early 30s. Since 1980, Sandy has written and contributed to more than 100 books, including specialist academic titles, short story collections, and more than 30 popular children's books. Alexander McCall Smith became a household name in 1998 with the publication of the book we're discussing tonight, the first book in his highly successful The #1 Ladies Detective Agency series. This series has now sold more than 20 million copies in the English language alone, and the 20th book in the series, To the Land of Long Lost Friends, was published on October 22nd. I met Alexander McCall Smith at the G8 Summit in Scotland in 2005, and since then, he's been a Texas Book Festival author, a National Book Festival author, and now our very beginning Laura Bush Book Club author. Mr. McCall Smith has a brilliant and unique way of writing. The language is rich and descriptive, and tonight we're transporting us right to the foot of Kigali Hill, next to the tiny white van and thorny acacia tree. You can smell the brewing red bush tea and taste the dust in the air. Sandy's stories stay with his readers for a lifetime, and the characters become friends. You might find yourself wondering what's next for Mama Ramotswe or Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni, and that's why we're glad you're here and glad that Sandy is on book number 20, and we hope there are many more to follow. Joining Sandy tonight for our discussion of the #1 Ladies Detective Agency is NBC News 5 anchor Meredith Land. Meredith has won numerous journalism awards in her career, and I'm happy that she serves on the National Advisory Board for the Laura W. Bush Institute for Women's Health. So please join me as we welcome to the stage my friends Alexander McCall Smith and Meredith Land. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
It is a treat to be here with all of you tonight. And first of all, we want to say happy birthday to Mrs. Bush, right? I know you wanted to. And at the very end, we'll let you read the poem that you wrote to Mrs. Bush for her birthday,
yes,
right?
I look forward to doing that.
And the title?
Well, the title of the whole poem is The Goodness of Books, and I'll read just a section of it, the very last bit, which is called On the Bedside Table.
Right. Looking forward to that. Everyone gets a copy of that tonight, along with another short story that you wrote exclusively for the Bush Center a few years back. But I want to talk, first of all, about your friendship with Mrs. Bush and President Bush and how it came to be.
Well, I was invited, as Mrs. Bush mentioned, I was invited to go to a dinner in Scotland at Gleneagles when there was this big meeting there. And I wasn't expected to say anything about what they were generally discussing.
Right.
But I was very privileged to have dinner with a number of people present there, and that was when we first spoke to one another. And I then took an interest in the work which was being done during the Bush presidency in Botswana in particular. And I was very struck at the very positive contribution that was being made. And in particular, the United States really was very, very helpful to Botswana in its hour of need when they were struggling with the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And I was very impressed with that work. And so that was something, obviously, which attracted my attention and which I was interested in. And then I was just delighted to know that Mrs. Bush was following the life of Ramotswe, my fictional character whom I had invented. I find that with the readers, the interesting thing is that when you create a fictional character and then you meet people who read the books, it's as if you've got a friend in common.
Immediately,
It's
right?
Yes. So we all know that Ramotswe doesn't exist. But as far as most of us are concerned, we feel she's a real presence in our lives, which is very nice.
Very nice. And you sort of feel like you're at home in Dallas, right? You have ties to SMU.
I do, yes. This was wonderful coming to the center here today. I was driving up from the Adolphus Hotel, and it was wonderful when I first saw the campus. There were the familiar buildings, because I was a visiting professor at SMU on 2 occasions, first in 1988, and then again in 1998, exactly 10 years later. I was a visiting professor in the law school here, and that was my first exposure to Dallas. And I enjoyed myself immensely, and I made some very, very good friendships here, friendships which have lasted for decades. And so it was great fun, and it was a very interesting time for me. And every morning, I lived just around the corner from here when I was in Dallas. Every morning, I would go off for breakfast at Bubba's.
Did you really?
Which is,
you got fried chicken?
No, you see. If I'd eaten too much Bubba's fried chicken, I wouldn't be sitting here today. You know, I
you
would
had to get out of Dallas.
I would have succumbed. No, I went for the biscuits. The biscuits at Bubba's are just, and indeed, day before yesterday, I went for a wonderful down memory lane trip to Bubba's for breakfast, and I recognized one of the waitresses who's been there all that time.
Oh, yes.
It was just terrific. It's a unique institution. It must be conserved. You must have it. You must have it declared a place of historic importance. Because where else are you going to get lipstick pink benches and Art Deco handles on the? It's just a wonderful. It's a very, very great.
Well, we're so honored that you love Bubba's. We didn't know we'd go there tonight, but interesting nonetheless.
Yeah,
I want to talk about your process. Everyone probably wants to know, how do you write?
Mm-hmm.
Do you write in the middle of the night? Do you have goals for how many words a day?
Well, yes. I mean, you have to be organized as a writer. That's one thing which is really important, and most writers would probably acknowledge that. You can't wait for the muse to come and tap you on the shoulder, because she'll never do that. And so people who say that they've got a great novel within them and they're just waiting for the muse to arrive, they really need to be disabused of that notion. In fact, if people feel they've got a novel within them, they should have an X-ray, because you know, with modern imaging techniques, they could tell whether it's an historical novel or autobiography.
Right.
They'd say, you've got an autobiography within you, yes.
We have all the technology for it.
All the technology can do that, but you actually have to have a regime, and I do that. I write every day, and I have a regime of spending. I need to write about 2 or 3 hours a day, but I can write anywhere. Really, I can write on planes and trains and hotels, and because I travel quite a lot, and
right.
so you have to be able to do that. Writing is, I wouldn't say it's exactly hard work. The writers' unions would all say, oh, it's terrible hard work and great effort, but it's great fun. It's a very, very satisfying occupation, but you do have to be disciplined. So I have a goal usually of writing 2,000 to 3,000 words a day, which I have to do, because I publish about 5 or 6 books a year, so I have to do that. Not all writers have quite that goal. Flaubert wrote 35 words a week. But they were very good words.
They were.
And they were in French as well. So it was...
Have you ever had a period where there's just a block? You've had that writer's block?
No, touching all available wood, I haven't. I haven't had that. With me, it's the opposite in a sense. I have rather a lot of ideas, and I don't have a sufficient opportunity to translate them into books. So there are always too many ideas waiting to be written. I have a notebook always with me, and I write down things that I hear, what people say, things I see. I like listening to people's conversation. As an author, you have to be interested in the conversation of others, and you don't want to make it too obvious. You don't want to go and sort of listen like that, but you do want to pick it up. I think it's a great pity that these days a lot of conversations are on cell phones, so you only hear one side of the conversation. And this could be, you hear people saying very interesting things, but you don't know what's going on the other side of the conversation. And I take the view that in public transport, for example, people should be obliged to plug their cell phones into the public address system. So you get both sides of the conversation.
Right, you can hear it all.
Much better, yeah.
That's a good idea.
It is a good idea. I have suggested it in the past. Nobody's acted upon it.
No one's jumped on that just yet. The #1 Ladies Detective Agency is just one of the series. Why serials for you?
Well, I never thought that I would be a serial novelist. But I became that, and it's a curious thing. It's a bit of a condition, actually. It's a medical a medical condition, and the symptoms are that you write serial novels, and there's no known cure. You write serial novels and then you die, and so it's quite a tricky thing. And some people have it quite badly. Patrick O'Brien, who wrote these wonderful naval historical novels, the Master and Commander series, he wrote 20, and he's now dead. And and Marcel Proust was another one. Marcel Proust, he went on. Do you know that with Marcel Proust, if you take the longest, he was a real gas bag. If you take the longest sentence in Proust, print it out in ordinary size type, it'll go around a wine bottle 17 times.
Oh, is that right?
So I don't know if I'm answering your question, Meredith. I think this is going downhill quite rapidly.
Yes, it sure is. It sure is. Let's get back on the
Let's get back to the question, yeah.
So you were born in Zimbabwe.
Yes.
You grew up in Scotland, hence the attire, right? And you write about Botswana.
Yes.
Why Botswana?
Well, I'm very fond of Africa for obvious reason, having spent my childhood there. So that is something which I really like. And what happened was that when I had my day job, I was a university professor. I was a law professor. And I had been involved in looking after students from Botswana, Lesotho, and Swaziland when they came to Scotland. And then I went first when I was on sabbatical, I went to Swaziland. And then the following year, I was asked by the Botswana people to start the law school there. So I went off and did that. Okay. And I discovered a country that is really quite exceptional. It's a very, very nice country. And they're really, really nice people, very charming people, very courteous people. And it's a country which actually has been very successful. And they have been consistently democratic since independence in 1966. And they've built the country themselves, and they've done really very well. There's very little corruption in Botswana compared with neighboring states. And so I just admired them. And I thought then that I would write about a woman in that society. And so I really wanted to write about somebody who, I suppose, demonstrated the virtues of that society.
So you came up with Ma Ramotswe.
I came up with Ma Ramotswe. What had actually happened was that years before that, in Botswana once, I was staying with people in a little town called Machudi, just north of Gaborone, the capital. And my hosts were being given a chicken by a lady in the village. And we went down to collect this chicken. And we went to this house, and there was this rather nicely kept little house with its yard well swept. And there was this traditionally built lady in a red dress walking around, and there was a chicken walking around in blissful ignorance of what was about to happen. And she chased the chicken and fell upon it. The odds were against the chicken. She fell upon it, picked it up, and dispatched it and gave it to us. And I thought, what an interesting woman. And I wonder what her background was. And that idea bubbled away in my subconscious mind for years. And then eventually I sat down and I wrote what I thought would be a short story about a woman in Botswana who's at the deathbed of her father, Obed Ramotswe, great judge of cattle, big cattleman. And he says, when I die, Precious, sell the cattle and start a little business. And he has in mind a sensible business like a hardware store or something of that sort. And she says brightly, I know, I'll start a detective agency. And he gasps and expires. And, and that led to the book, and then one book led to another, because at the end of that first book, the characters are engaged. Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni proposes to Ma Ramotswe. He says, marry me, Ma Ramotswe, I'm only Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni, that's all who I am. And she says yes. And then the publisher said, you can't finish books like that. You actually, if you get characters engaged, you must get them married, so write a sequel. So I wrote a sequel, but I forgot to get them married in the sequel. And so the publisher said, well, make it a trilogy and get them married in the third one. So I wrote the third book called Morality for Beautiful Girls. And again, I didn't quite get round to having a wedding.
The actual wedding.
So he said, well, make it a quartet, and maybe you could use a working title to remind you and he said, you know, why you could call it The Wedding, for example. And he pointed out that Tolstoy had used a similar technique, in that Tolstoy had wanted to write about both war and peace. And in his case, it had worked. So anyway, so that's how I got going. And once you get serial novelism, then you get it. And I was thereafter I was writing serial novels. And then I was in San Francisco, and Amy Tan, the novelist, had a party. She said, when you come to San Francisco, we'll have a party. Went along, and I met Armistead Mopa, who writes the Tales of the City, which was the revival of the serial novel. Those were published in the San Francisco Chronicle. And he said to me at this party, whatever you do, don't write a serial novel in the newspaper. And I went back to Scotland and did just that.
You did. Challenge accepted, right?
Challenge accepted, yeah. Which I then enjoyed, and I've written 13 in that series, the Scotland Street series. I had great fun with that, and I continue to do it.
Well, I love Ma Ramotswe in this book. She's a strong woman. She forges her own way. And in most mysteries, there's one big mystery to solve. And then with her, these are small little crimes, right, that she's solving in her agency.
Well, that's right. Even if they are crimes, you see, I don't really consider myself to be a crime novelist or a writer of mysteries as such, because if you look at the real crime novelists, well, they look a bit different. They wear sort of dark T-shirts and have stubble, and they've got something called edge. And I've been trying to develop edge, but
you have plenty.
No, I haven't. No, I've got no edge, and so I'm different from that point of view. Also, I think that crime novels. I think it's a pity that they write so much about homicide. If you take the average mystery, the genre requires that they have bodies all over the place. Now, homicide is a relatively unusual crime, and I think that if crime novelists were social realists, as they claim to be, you know, it's part of the edge business. If they were social, they would write about more common offences, such as parking offences. And
agree.
Yeah, well. And you see, the parking offence novel has got potential.
So these shorter crimes versus one big crime in a mystery, how does that affect the pacing of the novel? I mean, does it kind of, it clips along, right? A little quicker, or? Yes,
well, I suppose if you've got very big things happening in the book, as in many books in this genre would have, then that's obviously going to engage people. And but in mine, nothing really much happens, and I I take the view that there's quite enough happening in the world today without authors making it worse by inventing. So my characters, they have these really little problems, and they enjoy it. And then every so often, and as far as pacing, you ask about pacing, every so often they stop and drink tea, which is quite useful. And people have asked me, is the tea performing some very important symbolic role?
Is it?
No. It's the answer is that actually it's just when I can't think of anything else to happen, they have tea.
A spot of tea.
and sometimes they eat a bit of cake. You know, there's a lot of cake in my novels. You can never have too much cake in a novel, I find. So they are different. I do like writing these books which have some sort of vague connection with detection. I've started a new series set in Sweden, the Department of Sensitive Crimes. I invented a Swedish detective called Ulf Varg, Ulf being Danish for wolf and Varg being Swedish for wolf. And so he's Wolf Wolf. And he has...
Don't you just picture him with his computer cracking himself up?
Ulf Varg, Meredith, has all the issues that Scandinavian detectives have. Namely, he's depressed, because they're all depressed. Scandinavians are very depressed. And he's got a dog called Martin, who's depressed as well. And Martin also is hearing impaired. He's the only dog in Sweden who's been taught to lip read. So you can see that's social realism.
That's interesting. We'll have to pick that one up. I want to unpack this for the audience. What philosophy of life is Ma Ramotswe articulating when she thinks to herself, and if you read this, you remember, it was time to take the pumpkin out of the pot and eat it. That was what solved these big problems of life.
Yes.
What was this? Where were you headed with this?
Not too sure, but but since you ask, pumpkin, you see, pumpkin is symbolic. Pumpkin is symbolic of yellowness, to begin with. And it's a good, solid, reliable food, non-fancy food. So she's talking about the requirement of actually just attending to the small things of life. That's the philosophy. Pay attention to the small things of life. This is not a radical suggestion. There are all sorts of people, and all the mindful people are saying that to us, and the Buddhists have been saying that for thousands of years. Pay attention to the small things of life, as represented by an experience of eating pumpkin, for example. Pumpkin, I like pumpkin. The reason why I write about pumpkin is I like pumpkin. And Ma Ramotswe, she has pumpkin, she eats it in the way in which pumpkin should be eaten. You people in America do terrible things to pumpkin.
What do you mean? What, the pie? The pie?
Yes, pumpkin pie. It's awful.
Well, how do you eat it?
It's awful. I mean, you don't put sugar in pumpkin.
Well, how do you eat it?
You
bake the seeds and...
No, what you do is you cut it into squares. Ma Ramotswe does this as well, not just me. You cut it into squares, boil it, and then you eat it with butter and gravy with meat. That is the way pumpkin should be eaten. If God had intended pumpkin to be sweet, he would have made it sweet. So really, we should just accept it to that.
So no pumpkin pie for you?
No pumpkin pie. I'm sorry to, I know it's very rude to say that when you're a guest in a country, but pumpkin pie is pretty terrible.
Well, you know, Bubba's does serve that seasonally. I just warn you if you go back.
Oh, well, that's an exception. I mean, their pumpkin pie would
That'll be fine with you.
They fry it.
They probably do. They have a lot of butter, Ma Ramotswe, she does not want Africa to change, right? And tell us why that was important for you in this character.
Well, I think that she talks about the old Botswana values. She thinks about her father, who'd been a miner. He'd gone off to the gold mines in South Africa, then come back to Botswana, which was a common thing that happened in the past. There was a lot of migrant labor going to places like Johannesburg. And she thinks of him, and she thinks of the values that he represents. And I think that that's something that a lot of people often think of when they contemplate their father or their grandfather, grandparents, whatever, that there are values that we describe as the older values. And those old Botswana values were ones that she very much appreciates. And I think she would not want to lose those. And I think many of us feel that about our particular country, that we don't really want to lose some of the good things that we have seen in the values of the country. If I think about Scotland, there are various things that I hope don't change. That there are various traditions in Scotland. There's a tradition of Scottish hospitality, which I think is a really rather nice one. There's the various values that you will find in the culture. And that's what she wants. So she obviously accepts that there's modernization, that there's progress in material progress, and so on. But she hopes that that material progress, those changes, don't destroy the sense of respect that people have for one another, the courtesy that they show to one another. Because the modern world can be quite frantic. We rush around, and those bonds between people, or their sense of belonging, can be weakened by those developments. That's what she doesn't want changed.
Right, the goodness of people.
Goodness of people.
You've seen it, and the Bushes have seen it.
Yes, yeah.
As well.
Yeah, no, I quite agree.
Do. Well, this was made into a movie, a film,
yes.
TV series, the BBC and HBO. A lot of times, you know, when you read the books and then you see the movies, it's such a letdown, and you wonder how the author feels. Were you happy with the way the film turned out?
Yes, I was very happy indeed, because I had the great good fortune of the film rights having been acquired at a fairly early stage.
Good for you. Good for you.
Yes, of the by Anthony Minghella, and he couldn't make a bad movie if he tried. I mean, he was a wonderful director. I don't know if you remember his. Well, he did The English Patient,
yes.
But he also did Talented Mr. Ripley.
Right.
And The Talented Mr. Ripley was one of my favorite films, you know, with Matt Damon and Jude Law.
Gwyneth Paltrow.
And yes, and she was in it as well. And really, very, very good film. And so Anthony acquired those, and he took it very seriously. He went out to Botswana, got to know the people there, got to know the culture, and it was really a very good job that he did. It was very sad, actually. He died on the day of the premiere in London. It was extremely sad. I remember getting off the plane coming down from Edinburgh, and my mobile phone went off, and it was the producer saying Anthony had died that day, but the family wanted the premiere to go ahead, which it did. And then there was a 6-part, 1-hour, six 1-hour series, which HBO and the BBC did, and I think they did it very well. They had difficulty casting it. Interestingly enough, Anthony Minghella said that he was getting really worried because they were getting closer and closer to the date when they were going to start filming, and they were spending obviously quite a lot of money on it, and he still didn't have his Ramotswe and Ramotswe, and so they went right up to the wire on that. And I found that in the couple of years before they started filming, when news had got out that they were going to be making a film, wherever I went in the world, I was besieged by traditionally built ladies who said, here's my portfolio, I should be Ramotswe, you know, cast. And I had to tell them I had nothing to do with the casting. But when I did speak to the directors, I said, well, the person you need to get to play Ramotswe is the Minister of Health in Botswana, whom I knew, Sheila Clow, and she had played Ramotswe in the Gaborone Amateur Dramatic Society production of Ramotswe Meets the Pirates of Penzance. And the film people looked at me as if I'd gone mad, you know, was suggesting the Minister of Health. But when they went there and they met her, they realized she would have been a very good Ramotswe, so they gave her a job as an extra. She appeared as an extra. But Jill Scott did it very well. She played Ramotswe. She's by way of being a jazz singer, as you know, and Annika Noni-Rose did Ramotswe, interpreted the role extremely well, and Lucy Msmarty. They did a very nice job.
I have some questions from the audience. Thank you for filling these out. Katie says, can you tell us a little bit about the process of writing your Corduroy Mansions series?
Corduroy Mansions was another serial novel that I did. It ran to 3 volumes, and it appeared chapter by chapter in the Daily Telegraph in the UK. So it was a proper newspaper serial novel, then it came out as a book. So that was the way in which I wrote it, really, in response to the need to do a chapter a day for for the papers. And I had great fun with that, and I would like to, at some stage, revisit that series. I haven't done anything beyond the 3rd volume for some years, but I would like to go back, because that's another one that's got a dog in it. It's a very good dog in that series called Freddie de la Haye, and he's a great dog. He had a very bad start in life, because he started off as a sniffer dog at London Airport. And he was a victim of political correctness because they discovered all the sniffer dogs were male and that this was unfair to the female dogs. And so they fired half of the sniffer dogs and put in female dogs to replace them. Bad mistake, because thereafter the male dogs were only interested in the female dog.
All right.
And the drugs flooded into the country.
I'm going to start calling them sniffer dogs.
Sniffer dogs. So I would like to go back to Corduroy Mansions, if only to renew my acquaintanceship with Freddie de la Haye.
I love it. Hannah says, is there an idea for a new character living in your brain that you have not written yet?
Well, I do, yes. I do have various, I have quite a few ideas of new characters, which I haven't really developed very much. So probably, really, I can't answer that question.
You can't give us any scoop?
Well, I've got my notebook somewhere, but no, not really, because I've got this new series going on. I've also got my other series. I've got new adventures for my Paul Stewart series, my Italian Bulldozer and whatnot of it. No, I'll have to think about that, because there are probably a whole list of little elements of plots which may be out. Sorry that I can't answer that very satisfactorily.
That's okay. Well,
but I'm very happy to accept suggestions. If anybody would like to be a character in
line up at the end. We'll do that. And of course, you can watch this via live stream. I watch a lot of these Engage events online. Sarah from San Diego is joining us via live stream. Is there a character you write that is the most like you in real life?
That is probably best for somebody else to answer that question. I'm accused of being Ramotswe. I'm accused of being Isabel Dalhousie. I'm accused of being Bertie, who's one of my characters in Scotland Street. And I don't think that I'm necessarily any of those, although interestingly enough, I agree with the views of a lot of my characters.
Imagine that.
Ramotswe and I actually do agree on a lot. That's quite interesting.
That is interesting and surprising.
Yeah. Yes. And Isabel Dalhousie and I agree. Although, interesting enough, I do actually get people who think that what the characters say in the books actually always reflects my views. And that can be a problem, because obviously I'm writing about people who may have quite different views.
Right.
And I think it's wrong to attribute the views of characters to the author. So I give you an example. I had in one of my Scotland Street books, one of the characters came from a small town in Scotland that he was quite rude about. And he said what a boring town it was. Mm-hmm. My goodness, did I get into trouble for that? Because that wasn't me speaking, it was the character.
It was the character.
But the MP, the Member of Parliament for that constituency, said I should be obliged to make a special trip to that town to apologize to them.
To see if it actually was boring.
Yeah, well, actually it was slightly embarrassing, because I had cousins who lived just outside there.
Oh.
And one of them, I had to go to a family funeral there a couple of weeks after this, and I had to deliver the eulogy, and I saw these people looking at me with real anger for what I'd said about their town. Well, I hadn't said, but the character said it.
The character.
You can't please everybody.
You cannot. That is the truth. Peggy Williams, how do you decide to whom you will dedicate each book? That's a lot of pressure.
Well, I dedicate the books often to friends or people I've met who, and sometimes it comes as a surprise to people that they haven't expected it. On other occasions, I might say to them, "Do you mind if I dedicate the book to you?" But usually it's friends. I do actually have also, to be frank, I have a conversation with my assistant. and say, you know, heavens, they're wanting a dedication. Who can we dedicate this book to? And so we look at the Christmas card list. And
Right. Oh, that's one way to narrow it down.
yeah, it is, yes.
Dr. Kathleen Bishop says, I have a great idea for the next installment. Charlie has to take a computer class at the Botswana Secretarial College and receives a 98% on it. Ma still won't recognize it as better than her score, as it's not an actual degree.
Yes.
What do you think of this
That's
idea?
a very, very good idea. Thank you very much indeed for that. I think we will probably use that. I think
Good.
97%, Ma Makutsi is very proud of her 97%. It's her great achievement in life.
Right.
And she goes on and on about having got 97% in the final exams of the Botswana Secretarial College. So the idea that Charlie would get 98% is a lovely idea. That's a very good, yeah. That's excellent.
It's clever. Frida Dixon says the tiny white van was killed off to later be resurrected. Was that planned before the death, or did it just happen as the story advanced?
That raises a very interesting question of whether the author has control over what happens in a novel. And the answer actually is the author doesn't necessarily have control, because things can happen which you have absolutely no idea were going to happen. Right. This happens to me all the time when I'm writing. I've got a plan that something should happen, that this character's going to, and it goes out of the window because something has happened to the to change it. Now that's because fiction comes, I think, in so many cases, from the subconscious mind of the author. I don't sit there and say to myself, what's going to happen next? What's he going to say to her? What's going to be the result of that? It actually comes to me, and it comes from the subconscious mind, which is the bit of the mind, or that part of the subconscious that is interrogating the world, looking at the world and asking what-if questions, what's going to happen. And so I can be sitting there writing, and I can be astonished by developments on the page. So the tiny white van, yes, I hadn't planned its demise. And of course then, once it went, then I rather missed it. So we had to bring it back.
Resurrect.
Yes, resurrect. That's something that that authors often have to do. If they're unwise enough to dispose of a character, they often have to eat their words and resurrect the character.
Right.
Look what Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes went over the falls. Now, normally speaking, if you go over a set of waterfalls, you don't come back. That's a general rule, rule of thumb. And so he had to bring him back. And I think, actually, I mean, here we are in Dallas.
Right.
Dallas was the prime example of the late Mr. J.R.
Yes, it is.
He was disposed. He came back, didn't he?
That's right.
And it was all a dream.
How impressed are we, right?
You know, I think that's actually saying something was all a dream is a little bit of a trick. I mean, I think people might have seen through that. In soap operas, they get rid of characters. Australian soap operas are examples. Well, Australian soap operas, characters, if they want to get rid of a character from the soap, they send them to Brisbane. And so somebody says, where's so-and-so? Oh, gone to Brizzy. And then they're away. They can bring them back. Or they wash them out to sea. This is another way in which you get rid of the characters. Characters washed out at sea, all they find on the rock is usually the spectacles. And then they're washed out to sea. They get to the other side, but there, they do survive. They get to the other side of the bay, but they lose their memory. And memory loss is a very common illness in soapland.
Yes,
it's one of the most
sure
common conditions, more common than the common cold, memory loss. They're always losing it. And then they come back 6 months later on. I'm back. So I've disposed of a couple of my characters. I regret, in both cases, I regret getting rid of them. My Scotland Street novels, I disposed of Ramsay Dunbarton, who was a very, very dull Edinburgh lawyer, and he's having his portrait painted by Angus Lordy, the portrait painter in the book, and Angus suddenly discovers that Ramsay isn't moving. And that's that was the end of that. And then there was a character called Lard O'Connor, and Lard O'Connor was a Glaswegian gangster, And I had him come over to Edinburgh, and he has a heart attack and falls downstairs, and that's the end. And the reason why I disposed of him was that I'd been reading about Glasgow gangsters' funerals. They're going for wonderful funerals with big hearses with horses with plumed feathers and everything, and big floral tributes. And I wanted to write about one of those, so I disposed of Lard O'Connor. And they have the flowers, they have their flowers, they spell out messages in flowers.
The flowers.
So Lard's ceremony, they had big man spelt in flowers, and then another one said quality. And then a third message just said dead. So you've got to be careful about disposing of characters.
I think you were hesitant to answer this. Jody Green, thank you for this question. Why did you choose to write about this character, Ma Ramotswe? Does she remind you of someone in your life? You said it's not you, but is there someone that inspired you?
Well, I think she represents a particular type, and I will have met many people like Ma Ramotswe in Botswana and elsewhere. I mean, we'll meet Ma Ramotswe characters throughout life everywhere. But certainly in Botswana, you meet these really, really remarkable, hardworking, intuitive, interesting women who often have to raise a lot of children, perhaps not with a great deal of money, and do so with great good spirit. And so she reminds me of people that I've met like that. But I think also, as you go through life, you meet all sorts of admirable people in all walks of life, and I tend to put those types in the books if I can, because I think we like to be in the presence of that sort of person. You know, the world is, in one sense, a vale of tears. The world is full of suffering and distress, and it's rather nice to know that there are kind, virtuous people like Ma Ramotswe around. So I like to write about them.
You love to write about women, strong women.
Yes, people often say to me, you know, how can you write about women as a mere man? But you may have noticed I'm wearing a skirt.
I did. It looks nice.
It helps. The kilt actually is a very comfortable garment.
I'm sure. I'm sure. But you do write a lot about women a lot.
Yep.
Why?
Well, that was quite a sort of big why, and when it wasn't why, it was why, and you know that's a why with an agenda, and
it is. As a strong woman herself sitting here, no.
Well, I'm interested in the conversation of women. I find, and as an author, I think it's important that you should actually be able to sympathize with other people and empathize as well with other people and understand what it is to be somebody rather different from you yourself, with different historical experience. And so I like writing about female characters because I enjoy listening to the conversation of women. Women do talk about slightly different things from men. Have you noticed that?
I have.
Right, yeah. And so, and because as a man, you might not really know exactly what women talk about amongst themselves, because when you approach, they keep quiet. And so, so you can't really tell. But the conversation of women is interesting. It tends to be more subjective. Women are more prepared to talk about emotional issues than, generally speaking, men are. I mean, these are vast generalizations I'm making.
Very.
But the thing about generalizations, actually, is that they're true. I mean,
sometimes.
You know, people go on about stereotypes, but there's a reason why stereotypes exist, because they're true. I mean, they really do reflect.
I'm a journalist, I won't comment.
You can't, no.
Oh, Christina Dodd. Often Americans jump into a topic or conversation without good morning, how are you? I was struck by the societal norms of polite greetings in Botswana in your stories. Is this still practiced there?
Yes, it is. The special greetings that you give in Botswana, in most transactions, you will go through these greetings.
Right.
And they can be quite lengthy, you know, sometimes in these African cultures, and you then, having said good morning, how are you, then you go and say, have you slept well? Yes, I've slept well. Have you slept well? And so on. This can go, how are your children? And then, so the greeting can
Right.
be rather long. But it's rather nice. There are cultural differences in this. In continental countries in Europe, when you go into a shop, you would usually say, if you're in France, you'd usually say, bonjour, madame, that sort of thing, which people don't necessarily do in English-speaking countries. I like the idea of saying good morning to people, and indeed good afternoon when appropriate. And I think that it's a nice habit. And I like it when you see it. I remember I was, a few years ago, I was on tour and I was in Mobile, Alabama. And I walked out of the hotel onto the sidewalk, and I was just going to walk around the block. And there weren't many people around, but there was this chap coming along, and he said, total stranger, he said, good morning. And we said good morning, and I thought how nice.
That's the South.
That in a city, yes,
Right.
that people should say good morning. I have a friend in Edinburgh who was the leader of a political party in Scotland. And when he was actually in the Scottish Parliament, one day he was walking up a street going into town. Not many people around, it was early in the morning, and there was this man coming down towards him. And as he was going up, my friend, the politician, said to this man, just very civilly, good morning. And the other man looked at him and said, yes, good morning, but I'm not voting for you.
But it is a good morning.
Which I thought was a bit of a shame.
I know you want to talk about To the Land of Long Lost Friends. You're 20th, right, in the series. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And anything you want to say about that we should know?
No, not very much, other than
moving right along.
We're back in Botswana, and it's friendship is one of the main themes there. One of the issues is that a woman has appeared to have lost the friendship of her daughter. And that obviously for a parent is a very unhappy development. And so it deals with that. Ramotswe is able to apply her healing assistance to that. I'm very interested in friendship, hence friendship occurs in some of my titles. I use the word friends. I think friendship as a literary theme is a wonderful theme. I mentioned those Patrick O'Brien books, the Master and Commander series, those naval historical books. They're really about friendship. The friendship between Jack Aubrey and Stephen Maturin on those boats at the beginning of the 19th century. And friendship, I think, is a fascinating subject. I address it in my Isabel Dalhousie novels quite a lot. What are our obligations to our friends? Do you have continuing obligations to friends? What if you drift away from a friend and you don't have much in common with a friend? What do you do? And we all have heart-sink friends who are sort of, I think we all have 2 or 3 allocated to us in life. Friends who, when they phone you, think, oh gosh, here we go. And what do we do? Do we have to maintain those?
Right.
For many people, that's a real moral issue.
What do you think?
Well, I think with heart-sink friends, I think if they're your friends, they must remain your friends. You can do things like change your email address.
Screen.
Which I'm not recommending, but no, I wouldn't recommend. But you have to be loyal to your friends,
Right.
and you have to continue with that. But so duties of friendship are an interesting theme.
It is interesting. I want you to read The Goodness of Books, the gift that you gave to Mrs. Bush, for the audience, and everyone, of course, will get a copy on the way out. It's a beautiful poem. Quite long.
Well, that's why I won't read all of it, because there's nothing worse than an author who reads from his own works. It's, generally speaking, those authors don't get many invitations. In fact, the authors who get invitations are those who say the least for as short a time as possible. I went to a book launch once where the author read for 45 minutes, non-stop. He just droned on and on and on, and we were standing. People were
It's rough.
who were pretending to have heart attacks. Yeah, it was absolutely
strategy.
Really dreadful. But so this is just brief. It's just those 2 pages there. Is that right? That's not going to be too long.
Please,
yeah.
please.
So this.
2 minutes.
This poem, yes. This poem is a poem called "The Goodness of Books," and I've written that for Mrs. Bush because, like many, I very much appreciate what she has done for literacy causes and for literary causes as well. So the poem is all about how important books are in our lives, and this is the final bit of it, called "On the Bedside Table," and it's about how we often want to give books that we've loved as children to our own children. So it's about the continuation of the appeal of those old books in our life. On the bedside table. Pray that in our later years, on our bedside table, there will be more books than jars of pills. Pray that when we dim the light, it is in a world of complex plots rather than one of rancor. Pray that we will still believe it important that the heroine should still marry the hero. Pray that to our children we shall still give those books we ourselves loved when young, that the dish should still run away with the spoon in an unwise elopement, that the Velveteen Rabbit will never be made less tragic by prescription antibiotics, that pirates will still walk the plank rather than be given the benefit of the doubt, that at the end of the day, Scout and Gem will still be read to by Atticus Finch, that mice and men and great white whales will frolic in their elements. Pray for all of that, and for that device, the book, our beloved companion and our friend. Thank you.
Love that. I love that.
Thank you.
This has really been so delightful. And if you ever need a really good spot to write, Bubba's will not be going anywhere.
Delighted to hear that.
We love your ties to SMU and, of course, the Bush Center. Thank you so much for your time tonight. This was fun, wasn't it? This was so great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes. We'll have a seat. I'm going to make a few announcements. I have a few quick announcements before we go. As always, we want to say thank you to Highland Capital Management for their sponsorship of Engage. And next up is November 17th. Jenna and Barbara will be here. Of course, they are dropping Sisters First, the children's book. It's sold out, but you can still purchase overflow seats at bushcenter.org. And, you know, we live stream it, so you can always watch it from home if you can't make it. The Bush Center's new special exhibit, Christmas at the White House 2007. Holiday in the National Parks, November 21st through January 5th. And it's a perfect holiday outing with family and friends. And tickets are also available at bushcenter.org for the Engage program. January 22nd, Brian Kilmeade of Fox News Channel, author of the upcoming book, Sam Houston and the Alamo Avengers. We're happy to report Dana Perino will be back, and she always makes it fun, and that's something you'll want to go ahead and get tickets for in January. And I think that is about it. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, President Bush and Mrs. Bush.